Hi everyone, welcome to this video where we're going to be painting flowers in oils, and we are going to use this photograph as a start for our painting. It's a photograph of a cone flower that I took a number of years ago in my garden. So let's make a start. What I've done first to help myself with the drawing of this painting is I have traced the photograph. The flower in the photograph, I have it traced on some tracing paper and I have it gridded up. So this section here is 10 centimeters, this is 15 centimeters, and you can see I've divided it into halves and quarters. So when I come to do my painting, I'm going to do my painting on a piece of canvas paper that is twice the size of this box to keep things in proportion. Now here's my box that I've drawn out with a pencil and a ruler, and the box is 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters, so exactly twice the size of my photograph. And I'm going to make a start now with a wash. So for my wash I'm using raw sienna, and I'm using some linseed oil and white spirit. Okay, and I'm going to dilute my paint, dilute it very much, and I'm just going to apply it to the area I'm going to paint. I like raw sienna because it's a nice soft yellow. It's not harsh or too bright like something like lemon yellow. So this will be my ground that I'm going to work on. I have my wash on, and now I'm going to give it a wipe down with a dry rag. So don't forget the grid line, the grid that we used over the photograph. Okay, so now I need to mark up my canvas in a similar way. So I'm going to mark the canvas paper. I already have it kind of pre-measured, so I'm halfway, quarter way, three-quarter way, and same at the bottom. I'm using a smaller brush now. I'm still using the raw sienna, but this time I'm not thinning it, so it's a little bit darker in appearance. Using a ruler just to get my grid lines fairly straight. Now I have my grid finished, so I'm ready to start the outline drawing of the painting, and I have my photograph on the left and I have my traced drawing on the right. I'm going to work more from the traced drawing because I have it gridded up. The boxes here correspond with the boxes in my painting, and also the image is a lot simpler. I'm really just concentrating on my flower, on the center and the petals and the stem. If you look at the photograph, it's much more detailed and it's very busy, and that can be a bit overwhelming when you start painting. Really just concentrate on the big shapes for the moment. I'm going to use ultramarine blue now, different color to paint the flower, so there's no confusion between my grid lines and my drawn lines. So starting off, keep an eye on my trace drawing there for the moment. So starting off, I'm going to start in the center of the flower, and the center of the flower seems to be about here. It's in this box, which is second row down, and I just want to get sort of the center of the flower first. So I'm just working my way down and around with the blue, and that's the sort of shape I'm looking at because there's a petal here that is sticking up in front of the center of the flower. So I then look at outer petals working from the center. So we've got a petal here that just sticks out like so. We've got a petal coming out here that extends out into the end box here. I'm just working my way around the petals and putting in the shapes that I see. One thing to be conscious of is negative space. So the negative space is the space in between the petals. So the green space in here and here. And I have a little diagram here which gives you a better idea of the negative space. Okay, so sometimes to draw the negative space instead of drawing the petal can be of help. So for example, there's a thin gap between the two petals here that widens as you go to the edge. And down here, the other negative space is a sort of a green triangle which comes down like so. And by drawing the negative shape, you're also drawing the petal, but you're not thinking about the petal so much. I'm just looking at the stem and where it is in my grid. So it's going to pass through the two boxes here, that section, and it ends up down here. A double line to describe the stem. It's quite thick, needs to be quite strong to hold up this flower head. And then on to the petal beside it that sticks out almost like a tongue here. Okay, so you can see from this basic drawing that petals are very different in their shapes. So flowers are not easy to draw. People sometimes assume that flowers are easy, but they're not. And what you don't want to do is end up with a flower that looks something like this, which of course doesn't look as natural as this flower here, which is out in the garden and blowing in the wind. Now I'm going to get rid of the grid lines because I don't need them anymore. Once you have the bones of your drawing in and you're happy with that, the lines you made with the ruler can be wiped away. Start mixing some colours now for my painting, and I'm going to start with the top area where we have lots of green. So I'm going to give a sort of a green base for this area. So I'll start at the top and work my way down. On my palette I have some sap green and I have some white, and I have my palette knife here, and I'm going to try and make maybe different shades of green. So if I take out some sap green into a new area, wipe my knife, have my rag there. I'm going to take a little bit of white. Be very cautious of white. White is very powerful, and just mix the two together. Don't add too much white. That's the main thing. I have some colour on my knife now. There's some green. And sometimes what's a good thing to do is just get your palette knife and hold it up against the photograph and see if you're picking up any colours or tones of green there. And I am definitely, I'm picking up some of the greens that are here. So this will do as a sort of a mid to light tone for the moment, and then maybe I'll just use the sap green on its own for my darker tones that I see here. Now I'm starting with sap green, darker sap green first, and I'm just going to start blocking it in wherever I see it. So I'm seeing a lot of it around here, particularly beside the petals, which are going to be nice and bright. So we have a lot of dark green around the petals, little spots of it here and there. I'm going to work my way in and just pick out any little spots that I see of dark green first of all. I'm not going to be very detailed in this background. I'm just going to keep it to sort of dots of colour. The detail will be on the flower. I'm going to keep my background kind of fairly abstract and nice and loose. So moving on now, I've put in some dark green. I'm going to move on to a little bit of that lighter green that I mixed on my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit more white because there isn't actually much difference between them. So I'm just going to adjust the colour a little bit. So there's the lighter green. I'm putting that in the gaps that I have around the dark here and there. I have mixed some ultramarine blue with my sap green for shadows, and particularly I suppose shadows that are close to the flower, because the dark green of course is going to push out the bright colours of the flower. So I'm getting in my darks here. Another thing I'm going to do is get in as much as I can my greens here in between my petals. I've quite a little cluster of petals there and it can get quite confusing. So I'm going to switch now to my lighter green, and I'm going to use that to just define the area that's green, and then the area that's left will be for my pinks and purples that'll come soon enough. So even just putting the little bit of green here, it gives me a better idea of what's what and where to go from here. Mixing some colour now for the flower petals, and I've got Permanent Rose, which is a lovely pink, and I have my white still, and I have my ultramarine blue up here. And at first what I've done is I've just taken a little bit of Permanent Rose out, and I'm adding a touch of white to it just to draw out the colour a little bit. And what I've also done here is I've added a little bit of blue into the mix. So even just taking this colour first and holding it up against my picture, I'm picking up a little bit of colour there, but there's hints of blue in a lot of these petals. So by adding the little bit of blue to the colour, we should get more of a hint of what's there. Okay. And there it is. So now I'm using a different brush, and I'm taking some of my Permanent Rose, and I'm going to use it to just block in my petal. Such a lovely colour, I really love it. And this should help me kind of establish what's what now. Life won't be as confusing. The more you start blocking in, the clearer things become. I'm using the nice bright Permanent Rose here, but what I'm noticing in the photograph is that we get shadow as you go to the end of that petal. So I'm going to switch colour slightly, and I'm going to add a little bit more blue to my Permanent Rose, and hopefully there's a difference now when I put this down. Yes, there is. That's good. So I'm darkening the petal as it goes out to the edge. That was just to hint at sort of the dappled sunlight that's falling on these petals. So in this area now we can start to see differences in terms of tone between the petals. Some areas are in shadow, some areas are getting light. As you can see from the photograph, I'm more concerned at the moment about the tone rather than the exact colour. Okay, another thing just to watch is your brush stroke. So I'm just looking at this little petal here, or the bigger petal, and it's sort of sticking up in the air. So my stroke is coming down. It's following those lines down through the petal. And I can also add, it's sort of a transparent kind of a petal where you can see a lighter touches besides the dark. So I have a little bit more white in my mix, and I'm going to put those white, a lighter pink strokes in between the initial darker pink that I applied. I'm using a brown for the centre of the flower, for the cone area. Okay, so it's quite dark to begin with, and then those little highlights, those little spikes of orange will sit upon this when it dries. What I've done is actually I can make a brown from my blue, my raw sienna and my Permanent Rose, or you can just use burnt umber. It might be easier to do that as well. You know, when you're blocking it in. So I'm blocking in some of the background, and in the photograph there's it's actually a sunflower. I think it was just dying off. The sunflower head is there. So look, I'm not going to get into the major detail of it, but I'm just going to give the impression of a sort of a brown ball in the background, and I'm just going to blend that colour in with the green that I've already put on. So I'm blocking in my greens, my background, my darker green, and then my lighter green. And remember, my darker green was French ultramarine mixed with some sap green, and then the lighter green had a little bit of white mixed with the sap green. Green can be difficult enough colour to kind of work with, so I'm kind of conscious here that it's, you know, it's a big block at the moment. So I have a little bit of Windsor yellow on my palette, and I'm using that. I'm just using it for the moment, kind of just to maybe break up a little bit of the green here and there, even just to use it to fill in any little areas that maybe I've missed, and so on. But I'm not going to get too detailed about it, okay? It's really just to add, I suppose, another dimension to that background. This is the first layer in the background, so we're going to put a little bit more colour on and have a bit more fun with it in time. Tricky area here now. I'm back to the petals, and we have petals that are overlapping and sticking out in front of each other and so on. So to describe that, I'm using my dark permanent rose mixed with some ultramarine blue, and I'm using that to kind of create some shadows and maybe to outline areas of the petals, where they meet, where they overlap, and so on, just to separate them out from each other. And then when I have that done, I will go for my lighter shade and just use that to block in what's there, just trying to keep it simple for the moment and not to do too much blending either. So I want to keep these dark lines dark, and I want to keep what's in between them a little bit lighter, so we get a sense of that shadow and light, and it looks a little bit more 3D. So again, I am putting in some of those darker lines that I see first, and then wiping the brush a little bit on a dry rag, I'm using my lighter shade of permanent rose, and I have a little bit of blue mixed with this one, so I'm using that to block in what's left. Don't over brush the paint, you know, you just want to get it kind of blocked in and leave well enough alone. A study in their own. So this petal in front is sort of twisting and turning as it comes towards us. So we've got sort of darker lines like so. And again, I'm going to wipe my brush, and then I'm using the lighter shade, particularly here, as there's a fair bit of light on that flower. So I'm using a nice light shade of the permanent rose, just to block in this area. And once you kind of go down the hill, if you know what I mean, on the petal, shadow returns. So I'm back to my dark again. Now in the lower area of the painting, I'm just going to give an impression of some flowers that are in the background also. Again, you can see in the picture there, you know, there's a bunch of cone flowers together. So I'm not going to be too precise about this. I'm just seeing little areas of kind of colours or petals that are sticking out. So I am just blocking them in. What they'll do is they're going to break up some of the green for me down here. So that's why I'm putting them in, and then I'm going to work some other colours in around them. Seeing some touches of blue in that background. So in reality, they're actually plastic bottles that I use to protect the flowers from frost at night when they're out in the garden. But I'm just using ultramarine blue and a little bit of white, and again I'm just adding little dots and marks of colour to break up our big areas of green. So that little corner there is blocked in for the moment, and we'll add other colours to it as we go along. Now I'm using some raw sienna mixed with sap green, and I am blocking in the stem and just working my way down, and not only stroking it down but also across. Okay. Doing the final area of blocking in the lower right section of the painting, and I have a lot of shadows down here, so I'm using sap green with a little bit of a French ultramarine mixed through it to darken it. I'm also using the sap green and French ultramarine blue mixture to just go back and I suppose reinforce my shadows, so really make sure that my shadows are nice and dark, and I've got, you know, darker tones, that they are good and dark where I have put them in, because those darker tones are going to provide the contrast with the lovely bright colours that will come on in the next layer. Now I'm going to just let my painting dry. So I'm back at my painting again, and I've just mixed some yellow and some white together, and I'm looking at now the background areas of my painting and making some nice bright colours. I've mixed some purple from my permanent rose, my blue and white, some of my light yellows and whites to break up the background area of the painting and add a little bit more light to the background. By using yellow instead of just using green and white everywhere, it just brings another dimension to this, just breaks it up more. Using some orange, red and yellow will make orange for you, and I'm just adding again little touches in the background. So I've now mixed an orange from a yellow and a red, and I am starting to build up some of the light touches, the little spikes of orange on the cone flower. So on the right hand side they are turning to the right. In the center they become more straight up, and then as you go over to the left they head for the left with your stroke. So I'm still building up the little spikes of colour, and the spikes on the left hand side seem to be slightly darker than the ones on the right. You can see it in the picture. Okay, so in the orange that I've made, I've just added more red to the mix to make it that little bit deeper. Actually, what I have used permanent rose, so that's the colour we were using on the petals, and I've used that with yellow to make the orange for this section of the painting. I'm using a very light pink to highlight some of the petals. It's nearly white. There's a little hint of permanent rose in it, and I need to be very sparing with this. So I want to kind of pick out the bright areas of the petal, but I don't want to overdo it. So I might see a little bit of brightness there, for example. And then as it goes back along the petal, it just fades away. Okay, so a little touch is all you need. I'm mixing some sap green and some ultramarine blue, and I'm mixing these to get a nice dark green. I'm using the dark green to describe some of the detail under the centre of the flower. So these little spiky, I don't know what they're called, but you can see them there. And also to bring a little bit more shadow down the length of the stem. So in the picture I can see lines on the stem, and I want to put in that little bit of detail that I see going down, and as I go down, maybe not to have it so continuous, I'm kind of here and there with it, and I see another little hint of a dark green on this side also. Now I'm using yellow to brighten the right hand side of my flower head, and just here and there adding another touch of yellow. So I have a dollop of paint on the brush, and I'm just keeping it to the right hand side. So that's my version of my coneflower from my garden, and I've kept the colours simple, and I've left out details from the photograph. I'm not trying to do a reproduction of a photograph. I'm doing my version, what interests me in the photograph. So I hope you enjoy that. Okay, thank you.